Jesus claimed both humanity and divinity. If Jesus is 100% God and 100% man, as Christians claim, does that mean that Jesus had the option to sin?
Okay, yeah, that's a really good question, and good Christians disagree on that question. All Christians agree Jesus did not sin. So that's not in question. What's in question is, was Jesus peccable? In other words, was it possible for him to sin? Did he have the ability to sin? Or was he impeccable where he had no ability to sin? I think if you just look at Jesus's human nature, you would say as a human, even if he was conceived without sin, it would seem that he would be peccable and have the ability to sin, because Adam and Eve were born without sin, yet they had the ability to sin. But we have to also look at the fact he's got a divine nature. And in his divine nature, the scriptures teach it's impossible for God to sin. So if a divine person, God the second person of the Trinity, adds a human nature, okay, then the only way that I can conceive of Jesus, the one person with two natures, an infinite divine nature and a finite human nature, the only way where it would be possible for him to sin, it would also have to be possible for him to cease to be God, because it's impossible for God to sin, and it's impossible for God to cease to be God. So I think that that's one aspect where the divine nature overwhelms the human nature. So any possibility of sin that his human nature would have had would not be able to actualize itself. So in other words, that quote-unquote possibility would not be a real possibility once joined to a divine nature. So I believe that Jesus was impeccable, that God the Son, when he became a man and added a human nature, so he's one person with two natures forever, he's fully God and fully man, that's called a hypostatic union, that it would be impossible for that person to sin. Now some people say, well, then it's impossible for him to be tempted. No, it's only impossible for him to be tempted by his own sinful lust because he had none. But it's not impossible for him to be tempted by outside sources like Satan and his demons. A drug pusher could tempt him to have drugs, but Jesus would say no. And so just as if there were an invincible army, it would be possible to invade an invincible army, even though it would be impossible. It would be possible to invade an invincible army, but it would not be possible to defeat them. So too, you could tempt an impeccable person, even though there was no possibility for them to give in to that temptation.